If you've ever heard of Latin American folk legends, the first one you might think of is the popular La Llorona, or even the Chupacabra. These are understandably popular in the modern day, and especially La Llorona because of its lore. But I think some of the lesser known Latin American legends are pretty interesting too, and what I want to do today is give you 3 of these that are surprisingly related and have some neat backstories. And while this isn't an episode of Fox Files, I'm Stoner Fox, and welcome to the folk legend trifecta of Latin America. Today we take a good look at 3 cultural legends you might not have heard of. Thank you for tuning in, of course, and happy spooky season. Now the names I'll be calling these legends are just the ones that I'm used to, but they do have a couple of different names depending on the country. And to simplify the storytelling, I'll refer to their main name, but then give them a nickname for the rest of the video. I'll also read a translated version of short stories I found online, so special thanks to those writers, and I'll link some of those stories in the description if you want to read them for yourself if you can. But with that, I want to introduce to you our first legend, El Cadejo. El Cadejo, which I'll be nicknaming the Wolf, is a terrifying dog-like spirit with glowing eyes, and depending on the region, hooves instead of paws. Some versions are even described as being tied to chains that it drags as it walks, but the commonly accepted legends say that there are 2 versions of the wolf, one being evil and the other one more of a protector. The evil one is described as black with glowing red eyes, while the protector is white with blue eyes. Either one is said to appear to drunk people at night depending on their luck, but the black wolf will stalk the person and then violently attack them, while the white wolf will generally stick near them to make sure that nothing bad happens to them while they're drunk. But even if the white wolf appears to someone, they're not all that safe. Adding on to the mythos, some legends say that if the white wolf licks the mouth of an alcoholic, that person will never be sober again, and the creature will follow the person for 9 days, giving them a terrible sense of fear until they can't function anymore or the person just dies. But then we also have a gray wolf, a legend exclusive to Guatemala, and is a mix of the 2 wolves, but also ignores the whole appearing to a drunk person aspect of the legend. This wolf is said to only be aggressive towards adults, instead of taking care of children and the sick. Other countries have their own aggression factor to the wolf, with some places saying that the black wolf specifically attacks bad people, and others saying it attacks both good and bad people, but will only kill bad people. Another cool legend says that if at any point both the black and white wolf show up at the same time, they'll begin violently fighting, with the white one usually winning. But as always, it's important to remember that not every region of Central America will even have a white wolf, and others like Guatemala actually merge both of the wolves. And with those details in mind, I will now read some of the translated stories of the wolf. The first story reads as follows. There was once a young man who was somewhat of a night owl. His name was Carlos Roberto, and he was a security guard for someone's land. He returned home each night very late, and he always found a white dog in front of his door. It was big and hairy, and it never let Carlos approach him. When the dog saw Carlos enter his home, it would turn around and disappear into the night. This happened every night Carlos got home this late. Carlos couldn't help his curiosity one day and decided to follow it, but quickly lost track of the dog. Someone then told him that the dog was El Cadejo, and that it took care of his family when he was at work. The next legend reads, a long time ago, when Hector was a student at church, he went out playing music with his friends through the streets of the town. One of these times, something very strange happened. They were on their way back from playing music one night, and everyone had gone their separate ways except Hector and his friend Felipe. When they passed by the park, a large black dog with red eyes started to follow them. They started to walk faster, but they couldn't lose the dog. Exhausted, they hurried to Felipe's house, rushed inside, and quickly closed the door. The dog then started violently pounding the door with its hooves until Felipe's mom grabbed the crucifix and pointed it at the dog, to which it fled. The third story reads, Jose had been drinking with his friends the whole day, and by nighttime he was so drunk that he passed out on the street. At midnight, he regained consciousness and saw a large white dog that then licked his mouth. Jose stood up and began to make his way through the streets. The dog followed after him, making hoof noises as it walked. As he approached the St. Gaspar public laundry, a group of men approached him and tried to rob him. The dog fought the men off and then followed Jose until he got home safely. The dog then appeared to him the next 9 nights because it had licked Jose's mouth. He never stopped drinking and died an alcoholic. So as you can see, the image of the wolf really depends on its portrayal in that specific legend. Overall, I think the Cadejo story is fascinating, as it takes a lot from the idea of a sinister force punishing those who misbehave, but also of a guardian angel fending off an evil presence. But if you're careless though, that same guardian angel will punish you for your own vices, which is a great segue for our next legend, Siguanaba. The legend of Sigua, who I'll just nickname Sigua for short, goes a lot deeper as she has an actual origin story. The mythology around Sigua involves a Mesoamerican native woman named Sigüehuet, which means beautiful woman in the Nahuatl language. Several versions of the legend say that she used witchcraft to seduce and marry the son of the god Tlaloc, and then had a child with him. Other versions even say that she had the child with Tlaloc himself, but the story always goes that she was a terrible mother, neglecting her child and even having affairs with other men. This eventually leads to her trying to poison her husband, making Tlaloc so angry that he cursed Sigüehuet to forever wander the earth as a horrendous-looking spirit. From then on, her name actually became Sigua, meaning horrible woman, although there's kind of a lot of debate on that actual translation. While the details surrounding her origin vary, what she does as a cursed spirit is pretty consistent in most countries. Sigua lures men into the wilderness, appearing as a beautiful woman from behind, but then when men get close to her, she reveals her inhuman face, which is so horrifying apparently that if men don't die from the sudden shock of looking at her, they eventually go insane and die in the wilderness. The true description of Sigua's face ranges from being a horse's face or a horse's skull to being a human skull or a mutilated and inhuman looking face. A lot of versions of the legend like to emphasize that Sigua only tends to target unfaithful or alcoholic men, a vengeful role that she might be taking on so she can atone for being unfaithful in her own life. Other stories like to go the route that she suffers an eternal punishment and that she lures these men to her because she's lonely, but only succeeds in scaring them to death because of her appearance. And for Sigua, I unfortunately only have one translated story from El Salvador, but it's long enough, and it reads, Mario doesn't remember that young man's name, but he does remember when he and the man worked on a relative's farm. He would begin to say that he saw Sigua there, and described her as a normal woman dressed in white. Mario says he told us she followed him everywhere. When we climbed the trees, he would tell us, "Look, there's that woman again." We didn't see anything, but he kept pointing at some bushes. He said the woman was calling to him to come here, but we couldn't hear anything except when he answered, "No, I'm not going," and insulted her. When the young man got older, he went to work on a bigger farm further away. Eventually, we heard the news that the man had fallen from a tree and died, but it didn't look like an accident. They tell us that Sigua got so close to him that she would climb the trees with him as he pruned them. One day, she pushed him off and killed him. Mario says that wasn't the only case he heard about. He had heard about other men in the town who were followed by the spirit. Mario says she got on one of the men's horses while he was riding it. He told her to get off. One time she tried to push him off the horse, and he told her that if she did it one more time, that he would shoot her. Then he became a Christian, and he never appeared to him. Another man, Ricardo, was seduced by Sigua at midnight, her long hair hiding her face as she filled a jar with water. Not knowing she was a spirit, he began to flirt with her. As he did so, she lured him to just in front of the town graveyard. "Kiss me," he told her, but instead she revealed her face. Ricardo said she had a horrifying face with 2 holes where her eyes should have been. He said he only thought to run, and that his tongue hung out of his mouth from fear. He ran even faster when he heard her laugh and clap behind him. So as with the wolf and many other folk legends, I'm sure, the description of Sigua will vary. In the story we just heard, one person said she looked perfectly normal, and then another where she looked absolutely hideous. And I like to see the different variations of the legends, as it gives them more depth and really drives home the point that in moments of pure fear, each person's mind will see something different. Or if you want to think of it as punishment for those people, Sigua may have the power to change her face depending on the level of that man's depravity. But it's quite common to see folk legends play on people's fear of seeing the unnatural. Yet very few folk legends base their fear on hearing the unnatural, which brings us to our third and final folk legend, Tsipitillo, known in some places as El Sombreron. El Sombreron, which translates to big hat, is described as the spirit of a short, well-dressed man with a giant sombrero who plays his guitar at night outside of young women's windows. His origin story connects quite well to the last one, and in fact, Tsipitillo is widely believed to be Sigua's son, the child that she had with Tlaloc, or his son. Several versions of Tsipitillo say that when his mother was outcast and cursed to be ugly, he was also cursed. Tlaloc, apparently feeling extra petty that day, cursed Tsipitillo with being short forever, living a life of a wanderer, and having backwards-facing feet, although that last part isn't too common to the lore. And for simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and call him Big Hat, because I don't think he deserves to be called short. As folk legend goes, Big Hat wanders from town to town in search of young women to romance. When he finds someone he likes, he waits for nighttime and then starts serenading the girl by playing his guitar outside her window. His love songs are said to be capable of making any girl fall in love with him, making them desperately pursue him until they disappear and are never seen again. Keep in mind that most versions portray Big Hat as a wandering spirit, so any woman who searches for him is doomed to search forever and never find him. If a young woman hears Big Hat's music, but for whatever reason doesn't go after him, she won't stop thinking about him and will eventually become depressed, stop eating, and die of heartbreak. And supposedly the only way to break Big Hat's spell is for the girl's family to take her to church to have her blessed, and then cut her hair short. And yet other versions of Big Hat, like the ones in Colombia, describe him as a more aggressive figure, chasing people like cheaters or drunks on horseback. But if that wasn't enough, this version of Big Hat has sometimes been seen as having two large dogs bound by chains at his side. And I don't need to tell you how cool it is that Big Hat and the two wolves could be teaming up sometimes. As for Big Hat, I again sadly only have one translated story, but it's long enough, right? The structure of the song in this story is quite different in English, but I hope I did an okay job in translating it and conveying the same feelings. The story reads as follows. One night, 4 mules appeared, tied to the corner of Selina's house. 2 neighbors passed by and commented, "Aren't those the mules of El Sombreron? God save us," and they took off running. Inside her home, Selina was getting ready to sleep as she was tired. As she tried to sleep, she heard a sweet voice singing to nice music outside. The voice sang, "You're a little dove, white like a lemon blossom. If you don't promise yourself to me, I shall die of passion." After that night, Selina happily waited every night to hear the music again. One night, her curiosity took her to her window. To her surprise, there stood a small man in shiny leather boots with golden spurs, singing and dancing with his silver guitar in front of her window. Since then, Selina never stopped thinking about him. She didn't eat and only waited for the moment when she heard him again. The man had bewitched her. When the neighbors found out, they advised Selina's parents to take her to a convent to save her, because that man was a goblin. Selina's parents took her to the convent, where every day she got sadder and sadder, dearly missing the beautiful music. Meanwhile, the little man went crazy looking for her. Eventually, Selina couldn't take it and died on the day of Saint Cecilia. On her wake, a heart-wrenching cry was heard. It was El Sombreron, who with great pain came to sing to his love. "Oh, oh, when you leave tomorrow, I'll go down the road to give you my handkerchief full of tears and sorrows." The people who saw this cried at his suffering and tell of the heavy tears he shed as he sang, "So low I feel that here I've lost my love, that evil seems good and good seems evil." They say that every year on the day of Saint Cecilia, 4 mules appear next to Selina's grave, and El Sombreron can be heard singing, "Heart of holy wood, branch of lemon blossom, why do you leave and forget the one who loves you?" And the legend goes that El Sombreron never forgets the woman he has loved. As depressing and sad as that last part sounds, I find the tale of El Sombreron, or Big Hat, to be more tragic than anything else, right? Most legends portray him as a cursed wandering spirit only looking for someone to love, but only succeeding in driving these women insane. And I really couldn't find a story on the more evil Big Hat, but I don't think I need to. As I keep saying, not one version of any of these legends has to be the right one, right? As they stand as stories whose interpretation is a product of cultural experience and traditional values. You have a dozen or so countries that each has their own culture, not to mention regions within those countries that also have their own stories and folklore. In fact, it's quite interesting to see that a lot of these Latin American countries have a general story to tell with these myths, but that the variation between them is rich and carries its own implications for these legends. These variations are also driven by historical events and many generations of storytelling that each serve to bring out the unique experiences of where these stories come from. But something I find especially interesting is that these 3 legends all have something in common. For better or for worse, all the legends serve as warnings. The wolf serves as a warning to people stuck in addiction, in this case alcoholism, an unfortunate epidemic very rampant in Latin America, stemming from societal issues ranging from poverty to the lack of mental health awareness. The spirit embodies the idea of 2 opposing entities watching over a person partaking in a vice, and serving as a deterrent for those who can still recover from their addictions. Now, Sigua serves as a warning to the unfaithful or lustful, as well as a lesson on vanity. She's an example of how not to treat family, and to remain loyal to those you love or suffer the consequences. And finally, we have Big Hat, a legend with warnings for a culture so unique and nuanced that going into the implications of the legend would span its own series of videos. To make things short, I live in the United States, but being Latino, I also experience gender roles quite quite differently within my culture. Latin America is a diverse mix of indigenous and European cultures, and if you're familiar with history, you'll know that one of these cultures wasn't very nice to the other and eventually sought control of them to forcibly teach them their ways. Big Cat and by extension Sigua are in a group of stories that come from the merging of these two cultures. Stories like these were brought and often made up by the Spanish and were used to teach indigenous people that they should act according to Spanish values. Hundreds of years later, we see these evolved versions of the stories being passed down and often carrying those same gender roles that other countries may not necessarily agree with anymore. But despite these societal undertones, I find the legends to be fascinating, especially when you consider their interconnectedness, no matter how slight. I also really enjoy how each one of these has its own variations, adding to the fear factor as you think about how horrifying it must be to come across something like the Black Wolf on a random night, or Sigua in a forest while you're out camping, and more importantly, how unique your experience might be compared to others around you. I hope you enjoy these stories as well, and if you did, go ahead and share them because someone out there might find them cool as well. But thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and like, comment, and sub if you feel like it. Have a very nice spooky season, and I will see you soon.